Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I am continuing my top 50 TV shows of all time. We did part 1 early last week. I went through numbers 50 to 26. This is going to be the top half, the top 25 of the list. And I'm recording at this at a really stupid time because the lighting is going to change dramatically probably by the time this is done. And who knows how my voice is going to be by the end of this, given that we're getting into the more passionate entries. We're getting into the more loved entries. I won't recap the first half right now. I think I might recap the entire list before I do number 1. But I think without further ado, we'll get into it. Got a lot of shows to bring up. So, number 25 is Angel. This is obviously a spin-off to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's kind of the earliest spin-off I think I ever saw. It's not the first spin-off in terms of TV, obviously, but in terms of my encountering of them, I think it's the first one that I ever saw. And while in 2025, I'm very sick of the idea of lots of things being connected and having crossovers and stuff like that, when you only have 2 shows, it does kind of feel special, and it feels kind of unique and more seamless, more like a big deal when it happens, as opposed to when you have 30 movies and 6 TV shows and they're all intermingling constantly. It just feels a bit more special. But that's not why Angel's good, though. That was kind of a nice novelty to go along with it existing. Angel was just a cool idea because it took a couple of characters from Buffy and gave them a slightly more mature setting. Not actually that much. Like, it feels a little bit darker and a little bit grittier, but ultimately, it was still on a network station. It wasn't going to be like suddenly like it was on HBO with like F-bombs and violence and super, gratuitous sex scenes and things like that. But they did do a good job of just tonally going a little bit darker. And just like Buffy, it kind of, has a good but rocky first season and kind of finds its footing. By the time you get into a couple of seasons, all of a sudden they've established lots of supporting characters that rival the characters on Buffy, where you kind of fall in love with them, just like you did on that show. A lot of fans love like Fred, Wesley. I mean, Wesley wasn't a new character, admittedly, but still, even that was an inspired choice to bring him over. Doyle was a favorite, of course, and just like Buffy, it's insanely funny whenever it wants to be. It's effortlessly bouncing between comedy and more dramatic elements. Plus, you've got the fun, Freak of the Week episodes and all the rest of it. And it's kind of an interesting show to look at in terms of like what it was by the end, because it kind of changed significantly by then, especially in its last season. And it wasn't really meant to be its last season, but it ended up being so anyway. And there's always kind of like a what if kind of thing of like where it could have went next, because I feel like with Buffy, there kind of was a rough ending in mind. Now, the rough ending in mind ended up getting extended, and it ended a little bit later than originally planned. But with Angel, it kind of feels like they were just freeballing, because it was like, hey, we're playing with some characters we set up in this world. And I don't think that it, at least didn't feel like there was like a natural endpoint to Angel that they wanted to get to. It was more just like, we're just going to keep playing with these ideas and these characters and seeing where we want to go. And it felt like they were getting into like a new era of the show in season 5, and then sadly it got cancelled. But they do give us a nice little send off, and there's lots of things to love in Angel. So I'll leave it there. But like I think this is an essential watch alongside Buffy. I think you should watch them. Maybe not alternating once you get to them. I would certainly sync up the episodes that do cross over. But I do think it's part of the overall experience in a lot of ways. I think Cordelia was always a favorite on Buffy as well, so she was like a big get for Angel, and felt like a nice contrast to I think I always heard them say, we're bringing over Angel, the moody vampire character, then who do we also bring over? We bring the opposite of that. We bring the bright and cheery, overly cheery character. And that is Cordelia. So, and she got to evolve a lot from what she was on Buffy, because she had to grow up and was a very different version of that character as a result. So, no, Angel is excellent. Love it a lot. Number 25. Number 24. We're back to a comedy. This is Third Rock from the Sun. A sitcom that I don't think gets as much flowers as it probably should. Like, there's a handful of comedies, especially from the 80s and 90s, that always get brought up. And I don't think Third Rock from the Sun is looked down upon, right? Because there's definitely other sitcoms that I kind of like that the general opinion online seems to be, oh no, that's trash. And I just keep quiet about the fact that I like it and just shut up. I'm looking at you, Everybody Loves Raymond. Oh, that's not on the list, but I do enjoy that show, right? Like, the dad and the brother are hilarious on that show, and I refuse to make apologies for it. But Third Rock from the Sun is fantastic. It's so quotable. John Lithgow is a goddamn treasure, but he's not the only one either. Like, the entire cast, Joseph Gordon-Levitt in his young role, the Wayne Knight's in there. Like, there's just a lot of good cast members, but the premise is so good, which is that 4 aliens are pretending to be a family on Earth, and they don't really know about Earth stuff. So every episode, you get to have them encounter something for the first time and misunderstand it. It's fish out of water, but it's hilarious fish out of water, right? And it plays with expectations. The overacting's phenomenal. They get to be kind of like, it's almost like human beings discovered greed for the first time, and they just think greed's great, so they want to be greedy. And that, I don't know if that was specifically a plot, but that general idea applies to a lot of the show. Or just things that they misunderstand or don't get. In the pilot episode of Third Rock from the Sun, there's a moment where a woman kisses Dick, that's John Lithgow's character, and immediately after, kind of trying to play it off like he'd made a move or something, she slaps him. But he reads that as, oh, that's what you do after you kiss. So when he kisses like this other woman goodbye, an innocent kiss on the cheek at the end of like this little dinner party or whatever they're at, he just slaps this woman afterwards and walks away, like not realizing he just did something shocking. And it's it's just this hilarious moment in the pilot that just sells the entire idea of them not getting the world and them slowly realizing it and looking at it from this outside perspective of like, this is stupid, or this is great, why don't we just keep doing this, this is awesome, you know, like really funny. And having someone like Lithgow be the lead of that is just perfect. I think Third Rock from the Sun's up there with some of the best sitcoms of all time. I mean, easily, which is why I've got it on my list. But I find it very rewatchable, and I think a lot of the humor holds up. You know, obviously it's a 90s show, so I'm sure there's some things that don't, but for the most part, like, the humor still works very well. So yeah, 6 seasons, so it's, you know, it maybe could have went a bit longer, but I think it's 6 pretty great seasons with a lot of memorable, quotable episodes. I highly recommend it. So that's Third Rock from the Sun. Number 23 is Travelers. So this is back when Netflix would put out like just random things every other week, and sometimes they'd be really good. Now, this wasn't just them. This was like a Canadian TV network that had made a deal for Netflix to put it out in the rest of the world. But this is a show about time travelers who come back from the future to present day, but they don't travel physically. Their consciousness travels into a body of someone who is here, but, you know, they're not like evil or anything like that. So the idea is that they always travel into someone who was about to die anyway. So they're not stealing time from anyone who was alive. It's like, no, you were going to die in a car accident, so we'll travel into you right before the accident. So we've taken your life, but you were about to die anyway. So like, you had the time you were going to get as far as fate was concerned. And now we continue on in your body. So we have a bunch of characters who travel back in time, and they're travel back in time because they're trying to save the world, because the world goes to shit. Kind of a la Terminator. Not that there's robots necessarily killing everyone, but just that everything falls apart. Climate change, the society, government systems, everything. It's only 3 seasons, and it could have went longer. There was definitely clearly a second phase of the show, which it was maybe going to go into. Although I do think season 3's ending does kind of work as an ending. Like, if it had to get cancelled before it was, like, time, I think it was the best place it could have got cancelled, because it was kind of at the end of, like, a phase. I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll just say it kind of feels like a natural place where, yeah, there's stuff open that's kind of ambiguous, and you can kind of like wonder what could have been that 4th season, or the next 3 seasons even. But at the very least, it does have this satisfying point. But I think that the show is very good at playing with its mechanics. It sets up this idea that every time we cut to a scene with characters we don't know, a countdown clock will appear in the corner. And you realize quite early on that countdown clock is always counting down to someone's death. Or more specifically, it's counting down to a traveler arriving in their body. So they play with that, and it builds up your expectations of what's going to happen. That's really good stuff. Eventually, when more travelers come from the future, we start playing with the idea that the future's already kind of changed for the ones that we started the show with, because they've already altered things. There's also bizarrely an episode that talks about a pandemic, which like isn't exactly COVID, but like it was kind of in a weird way predicting some of that. So just really good, likable characters again. Most of them are really easy to get you know, kind of fall for and enjoy. I mean, some more than others, don't get me wrong, but there's a 2 or 3 characters that have got a lot of heart and really anchor the show and are easy to root for. It's very well paced. Season 1 and 2 are both 12 episodes, I think, and then season 3, which was only Netflix producing, was only 10 episodes, I want to say. So it's very tight, but I had a great time going through this. This was such like a gem of a find when it came up, and I think I love how it plays with its mechanics and its time travel, and of course I love the idea of traveling back to present day from a post-apocalyptic future, because that's, you know, I've grown up with Terminator, so it's appealing to me, and there's no way it's not at least a little bit inspired by that. But just the way they're dealing with different things, and they're all living double lives because they have to pretend to be the people that they've taken the bodies of, and there's some like weird ethical things that come up because of that, like how do they interact with those people's loved ones, or some of them have like really bad lives that they've sort of beamed into, where they have to deal with people that the host body had pissed off or had beef with or whatever. And in one case, one character goes into the body of someone who was mentally ill or had learning difficulties, and all of a sudden she was walking around and acting like a normal person, you know, with a healthy mind, and like kind of just had to pretend that there was some sort of miracle happened and that she got cured. And it's just like these things kind of come up, and it's like, how do we deal with this? And I think it plays with its mechanics. There was a very divisive episode in season 2, which I loved, and so did Connor. When we reviewed it, we loved that episode. That really dealt with kind of I'll just say it's kind of a Groundhog Day-esque thing going on, but like there's more specific to the show's mechanics. But we loved that episode. There was tons of comments on our review complaining why it didn't make sense, and maybe 1 or 2 had good points, and I was like, well, fine, whatever, but I don't care because it was good. 90% of those comments at least were just wrong and didn't understand the rules, because there was rules established with how this traveler technology works that they obeyed during that episode, and it made sense. And I think a lot of the complaints that people were saying are just them not understanding the rules, or forgetting the rules, or not paying attention. Which is, I'm only bringing it up because every so often I'll get a new comment on that video, and I tend to roll my eyes at it because I usually think they're just wrong. But but I really like that episode, so I'll stick up for it, damn it. So super fun, super good science fiction, playing with the mechanics. Yeah, great. Yeah, the way I keep talking about it. Travelers is very good. I highly recommend giving it a go, as my phone is dinging. I really should put that in silent before I start recording. Actually, the bigger thing with the phone recently is that I've been getting random spam calls like more frequently. So anyway, I don't know. Complaints. Anyway, that was number 23. Number 22 is Lost. Now, I'm actually a little surprised this is only 22, and I think on a rewatch it might rise up again a little bit, because obviously it's been a while since Lost aired, but Lost came along at a time when I really was needing a new show to like care about, like really care about, because, you know, there was Buffy and Angel, and those both ended kind of, you know, just a year apart. And I was like, okay, what's my show now? And I remember trying a bunch of things, and, you know, some stuff I've already mentioned. Battlestar Galactica was one of those things that I found, but I definitely started branching out a lot more at that point because I needed a show to really care about. And Lost was something that I'd heard some vague things about, and it was kind of like a weird launch because it launched almost a year later in the UK. Now, I'm not saying I waited that year to start watching it, right? I'm not saying that. But I remember it being weird when it finally hit the UK and I'd already seen the entire first season. It was a really weird time. But the Lost was this cultural thing, right? It was this big mystery box show, a group of people land on an island after a plane crash, and there's something weird about the place. It's not just a random place. They're genuinely 100% lost. Like, they don't know where on the planet they are. That's kind of the start of it, but there's a lot more going on, mysterious things happening, hints of science fiction elements or whatever, big ensemble cast, all that stuff. And the storytelling mechanic is that each episode would have flashbacks to one character's life before the island. In season 1, it was typically usually what was happening right before they were on that flight, like why they were on that flight in the first place. But, you know, as seasons went on, they'd go further back in their lives and do different parts that would be more relevant to certain things or whatnot. And that had positives and negatives. Like, you know, there was definitely times where they had to kind of like just, it felt like they had to think of something to do because they didn't really have a reason to do another flashback. So we get infamous episodes like the episode why Jack has his tattoos. And it's just fluff. And the weird thing about it, everyone always brings that episode in season 3 of the Jack tattoo episode being one of the duds of the show. And it absolutely is. I think the bigger problem I have with that episode is that it's after one of the best episodes of the entire show. I remember being so hyped from the previous week because Flashes Before Your Eyes, the episode right before the Jack Tattoo episode, is one of the all-timers. And I just like the disappointment the following week of it not, you know, maintaining that momentum was something else. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think the last 6 or 7 episodes of season 3 is the best the show ever got. That run of episodes building up to that season 3 finale and what it did at the end of the finale, I think is one of the best reveals of any TV show I've ever watched. And that was something that I love so much about Lost, is that it was pure pop culture, right? It was Pulp Fiction in the truest sense, where it was like a little bit of everything in terms of its mythology, in terms of like throwing in weird science fiction ideas and cult ideas and just all the things that would kind of like touch upon to sort of build up its weird mythology about what this island is, who was here before the people on the plane, and whatever else. And it was a truly special experience that, like, when it was firing in all cylinders, and you got a Flashes Before Your Eyes, or same character but the constant, or you got the season 3 finale, or just lots of great moments. And there's certain characters in that show that will always stick with me. Whether that be Desmond, Locke, Ben, like there's just so many great ones. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience that I hold very dearly, and at the time it was absolutely something I was obsessed with. I do think the final season is a bit of a, you know, it feels like they had like 3 or 4 good episodes left when they got to the final season, so the final season is mostly just kind of killing time. And there's like one flashback episode that just felt like a complete and utter misfire. I do actually quite like the finale, though, I will say. As much as I think season 6 is a bit weak overall, and if anything, I might feel stronger with that when I do get around to rewatching it. I wonder if I'll be more angry and just feel like annoyed because I'm not in the, you know, the mystique of like, oh, we're almost at the end of the show, that was kind of maybe sugarcoating some of the flaws towards the end of it. But I did like the finale itself, and I think that the experience of Lost in theorizing each week, talking about what things meant, and the excitement of getting certain answers and certain stuff, I do think there's a lot there to love that I think is going to still hold up when I watch it again, because there's just, you know, Michael Giacchino's music is phenomenal. Like, there's so many characters who have their own themes, and it'll kind of bounce around, and there's a death theme and whatnot. Like, the music's such a big part of that show as well. So it's such a special experience that, yeah, it isn't perfect. It's got some weird flubs and misfires along the way, and the last season in particular has got maybe more than it should. But there's some really great things I love about it, and I was never mad that they didn't answer everything that they could have answered. I think there's enough there to theorize a bit more again and have a sort of satisfying idea in your mind. There's maybe some things that I wish they could have, you know, clarified a little bit or made a bit more, you know, but just a bit clearer to sort of give everyone else the sense of what the stakes were at the end of the show. But ultimately, like, you know, I hate the cop out of, you know, it's about the journey, not the ending. I don't think that just stock phrase is something I want to throw out when it comes to Lost. The one thing I do kind of stick up for, because people get annoyed and say, oh, the creator said it was always about the characters and the mystery was secondary. And people get really snooty about that and sort of say that the creators are just sort of covering for the fact that they didn't know what to do, or they were making up as they went along or whatever. And there's some truth to that. I'm not saying they didn't, right? TV's kind of like that a lot of the time, to be honest. Sometimes you have to pivot. You try something, you add a Paolo and Nikki, or I think that was their names, and everyone hates it, so you just have to react and sort of, okay, let's scrap that, let's get rid of that as quickly as possible. You know, some characters are meant to die quickly, but then they're popular, so you keep them around, and they become mainstays. Like, things change in TV. But I do think that focusing on the characters for the ending did make a lot of sense to me. Without getting into spoilers, I do think there's something there. Um, and I do think there's more nuance to the ending than I think people maybe give it some credit for. I think people usually just sort of hand wave and say, "Oh, it was just this the whole time." Well, no, it wasn't just that the whole time. They're like you're kind of just simplifying it to make it easy to make fun of. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. But like I don't think you can just be as dismissive as I think a lot of people are when it comes to Lost. I think the experience is quite special, and it's still here. No, it is a bit lower than I maybe thought I would have it, and I think part of that is just because of the amount of time it's been since the show. Other things that have obviously captured my attention and love since then, and just like maybe overall stronger things. But I do think Lost deserves a place, and even if on a rewatch it even maybe slides down a little bit more, perhaps I think it's always going to be in my top 50 because it was such a window of time in my life where I was so obsessed with that show. From 2004 up to 2010, which is kind of a weird period because that's I was in school when it started, but I was 20, 21, give or take, when it ended, which makes me feel really old now that it's been like 15 years since it ended. But anyway, that's number 22. Number 21, and maybe this is a bit ballsy because it's not finished yet, but number 21, Stranger Things. And this is the sort of show that was made just for me. I get that it's super popular, and this might feel like a super mainstream pick. Like he's picking something that everyone loves. How bland! But Stranger Things is actually really effing good, right? It appeals to me in like several levels. I remember because again, this was before like I really paid attention to what was coming out from Netflix, and even if you were paying attention, it wasn't like they often gave you much in advance anyway. But I remember watching the first episode of Stranger Things and just like not really knowing what it was going in, and realizing, oh, this is a show set in the 80s about a bunch of kids who are going to get into some sort of supernatural, vaguely horror sci-fi adventure. And I grew up watching, obviously, Goonies, but I also grew up watching Explorers, which is a favorite of mine from childhood. It's directed by Joe Dante, about 3 kids who build a spaceship. So you've got those things going on. Obviously, E.T.'s an inspiration. As the seasons go on, you get inspirations from Aliens, from Terminator, and what do these things all have in common? I love them all. Like, they're all things I care about. And I think it's very easy to kind of roll your eyes and say, oh, it's just a bunch of nostalgia and references. And there's definitely nostalgia in it, don't get me wrong. But I think what makes Stranger Things so special is, one, the vast amount of likable characters who are entertaining to watch. But mainly the thing that works for me is that it's not just about referencing things. Obviously, yes, you'll see Back to the Future in the background because it's playing at the movie theater or whatever. They'll do those little like time Easter egg things. But it's more about how the plot and the way that the events play out is designed to actually emulate those experiences from all those movies and TV shows that inspired it, right? It's about feeling like when, to pick an example for season 1, when they're sort of like hiding Eleven in plain sight and taking her to the school for something, it feels a little bit like E.T. when Elliot's sneaking E.T. out of the house because he's got this friend that he can't tell anyone about, right? You've got this friend group that's hiding her. Or when you're running from monsters and you've got someone talking to them over a walkie-talkie, it gets very Aliens all of a sudden. The 4th season had a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street in its kind of setup. And one of my favorite things about that season is that even though it's clearly doing its take on Elm Street, everything that it's doing is kind of evolved from the core premise of the show, and everything that was set up from season 1 with the powers that Eleven and the characters that were being studied in a lab have. So it all kind of links back to that and doesn't just feel like out of nowhere. Like, it all actually makes sense based, like, the mythology in the way of they've, at least to some extent, planned out where it was going to go and how to use the rules that they'd set up to keep playing with things. The idea of the Upside Down, which is this alternate, like, hell dimension that people can go through and there's monsters coming from it. There's rules with that and how, like, that can interact with the real world that get evolved and are still being used into its 4th season. And I remember getting excited because when they do something where it feels like, oh no, this makes sense because it makes sense because of this thing that they've set up from seasons ago, and it feels like a natural thing that like it clicks in your head immediately. It's very smartly written in that sense. While also doing all these things like emulating the type of experiences that you got from a lot of these 80s movies that it's clearly in love with. And I think that's the key thing. It's not just about referencing said movies, it's about trying to actually make you feel the same way that those movies made you feel, right? It's not just about saying, hey, remember this thing? It's about, no, we're going to give you a monster in this situation, chasing down a character just like this, but with the benefit of it being a TV show and you've had episodes and episodes to build up relationships with the characters. So you care about them, you care about them surviving, you care about a lot of them. And Stranger Things has been very good at like pulling on the heartstrings and forcing you to say goodbye to likable characters, and like it does such a good job. And I think that for me, like some people think season 1 was good and then it's been downhill since. I disagree with that. I think 2 is a bit more uneven than season 1 for sure, but it's got some great highs towards the end. I think season 3 and 4 are the 2 best seasons. I think season 3 of Stranger Things is my favorite season of that show so far. Season 5 still to come, of course, so maybe that'll change. But the mall season, the giant monster, like Erica working with Steve in that, great. And look at Steve as a character, how much of a douchebag he was in season 1 and how beloved he became in season 2 to the point where he's one of the most fan favorite characters in the entire show. It's such a wild pivot, and I think the characters are great, the adventures they go on are great, and they harken back to a lot of movies I love, and then there's a lot of thought actually put into the mythology and the rules of how all this stuff works. Again, strangely for a Netflix show, and admittedly the ones that I've brought up have mostly been this, because the ones I like accomplish this, but there's a lot of Netflix shows that don't, which is why I keep pointing it out. It's very well paced for a Netflix show. It absolutely is. Barring maybe one weird episode in season 2 that feels like everything goes on pause for an episode, but that's, again, mistakes can be made and they can be learned from, and that's okay. But Stranger Things, I feel confident, even though the final season's not, we've got 4 out of 5 seasons. I felt so positive on season 3 and 4 that I just know that this belongs, unless season 5 completely shits the bed and I hate it. I can't imagine that this is not going to be on this top 50 list for me for the rest of my days. So, yeah. So before I even knew what anyone else thought of Stranger Things, it felt like it was made just for me and the things that I like and the things that I grew up on. So it's hard to not fall in love with it. The fact that I think it's actually pretty well done on top of that it just makes it feel more special. It makes it feel like it's not just nostalgia pops, because I think I would be sick of that by now. I think I would have soured on it if that's all it was. And I'm confident that, I haven't. So, all right, that's 21. Number 20 is Cheers. So we're back to a sitcom. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the most famous sitcoms of all time. It's almost difficult to say why it's so good, other than just, oh, hey, the characters are great and it's funny. I think because I was rewatching actually the first season or 2 recently. I drifted away from it. I think I started rewatching Parks and Rec again for whatever reason instead. Because I bought it all on Apple and it's all in HD and it looks great, by the way. It's great that even sitcoms have nice HD remasters now. Now we're getting into dangerous territory where some of them are being done with AI and you should avoid them. But Cheers isn't one of those. Cheers is a proper nice HD version, so it looks great. Anyway. And just watching it, and I think one of the key things early on about that show is the Sam and Diane relationship, and in many ways, from what I understand, it's kind of the first of its kind. Like so many sitcoms after Cheers were about the will they, won't they pairing. We see it in The Office, we see it in Friends, all these other big sitcoms that came later. But Sam and Diane was kind of the original version of that. And honestly, it might be the best in terms of comedy. Now, I'm not saying it's the best in terms of caring about the characters or the romance, because honestly, the relationship between them is frankly quite toxic, but it's really funny. It's funny all the time. They are awful to each other, and I am here for it. I still find it very funny when they're just sniping at each other and they're saying things that are sometimes inappropriate even by today's standards, but it kind of works in the context of them just being awful to each other. And I don't mind sitcom characters being somewhat awful. Although, to be fair, the characters in Cheers still have a heart. Even if they're being awful to each other, they still kind of have the heart ultimately, and there's still sympathetic moments. Unlike, say, a Seinfeld, where there's no sympathy with Seinfeld characters. That's not the point of them, and that's okay. But Cheers still has the sympathy and the heartwarming stuff at times. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add, really, other than just, again, it's immensely rewatchable, it's really funny, and the great thing about an 11-season sitcom is that it's so long that by the time you've done watching it, you could probably start watching it again and have forgotten a lot of the jokes and stuff from the early seasons, because it takes that long to get through, and it's just really nice to have that. So, yeah, Cheers, number 20, and I've spent half an hour, I'm still at like 19 to go. I need to speed these up. Number 19 is Batman the Animated Series. So this was a weird one to place, actually, because like I talked at the start of the first part of this about how difficult it was mixing sitcoms and like more serious dramas. But Batman the Animated Series is, again, like another thing almost, where it's just it's a cartoon, it's an animated show, and I don't really have a whole lot of those on my list, and it's just because I've never been like a big animated guy. Like, there's a few things I like, obviously. There's a few movies I like, but it's just never been something I've been drawn to. Even as a kid, like once I was past the age of like 7, I just wasn't watching a lot of cartoons. So, but Batman stuck out. Like, I really like Batman, and the thing about Batman the Animated Series is that, and for most Batman fans, like, well, you'll all know that this is one that you can still very much enjoy, having grown up, where it's still got a really great aesthetic, like the fact that it was drawn on black paper to give it like a moodier, like neo-noir vibe just works. Like, it is such a distinct thing that you can't help. And the fact that it gets to go through and do its take on all of the big rogues gallery, at least that existed at the time, and in some cases they created some of the rogues gallery. Harley Quinn would not exist without Batman the Animated Series. And I think the other DC shows are pretty good from that era. The Superman one is pretty good, Justice League's pretty good, and it's nice to see them get a chance to like sort of flesh out a lot of the wider gallery of those characters. But the Batman one is just special. Kevin Conroy as Batman and Mark Hamill as the Joker is just inspired. It's the perfect voices. It's the voices that I think most people who grew up with this show hear when they're reading the comic books, and they hear the voices in their head. They're hearing Conroy, right? He is in many ways the Batman that no one else, no live action actor could ever really live up to. Because Batman essentially is kind of like this larger than life, even though he is just a person in a suit, right? Even though that, but the idea that Batman, when he's actively Batman, he's larger than life, he's this almost phantom to the criminals. There's something about live action that'll just never quite capture the beauty of a silhouette and the animation of this show, of like selling that idea. So, not that it's like got everything perfect, it's not got all the elements of Batman that I like, but god damn it, is a good starting point, and it really, laid a foundation for a lot of Batman lore for me as a kid. So, yeah, Batman the Animated Series is special, and unlike a lot of other things that I watched at that age, like the Turtles cartoon or Power Rangers, like this one's kind of held up. Now, I still love Turtles as a whole, but I'm not really going back to that cartoon anytime soon. So it's kind of special in that regard. So that's number 19. Number 18 is a more recent watch for me, and that is Babylon 5. So this is a science fiction show set in a space station, and there's a whole mythology around it that is very dense and very heavy, that is built up over time, about different warring alien species, or at least alien species who have been at war and have tensions now. But there's also like prophecies of things happening, and like this evil new entity or race that are showing up from somewhere in the universe. But it's got great characters for one thing, right? I could sit and just lyrically speak about how much I love both Londo and Jakar for quite some time. But obviously it's punching above its weight in many ways, because it's relatively low budget, and like the visual effects of this like cable channel in the mid to early 90s is pretty rough and looks pretty rough. That said, though, if you buy the show now on like Apple or Amazon or whatever, you do get a nice HD version. It's just the visual effects look really, really soft because they didn't redo those. But it's it's a really well thought out show that has like a long form storytelling at its core, where it's setting things up in season one that it's not planning to pay off until seasons later. It's got big ideas and themes that it wants to say about just about the world, about politics. It's kind of like re-examining things in history or in mythology through the guise of these new alien races that we're looking at. And it does such a great job of making you care about certain characters. And I think the big thing that got me was how much of a sense of tragedy I felt when certain things went bad, because, a relationship felt like it was improving and it was getting better, but then someone would make a decision and I'd feel that, like, cut deep in my stomach where I'm like, oh no, like this is going to ruin the progress that we've made. And in many ways, it felt like it was really touching on a lot of great things that, it felt like it was like a really dense, well-written show about just everything. Politics is maybe the best one to talk about, but just about prejudice, about how we split into different camps, about how we can maybe overcome our differences, things like that. Really heady ideas that are all, again, wrapped up in a really nice, digestible science fiction show where there's spaceships and there's aliens and we get cool one-off episodes where there's a monster on the station or whatever. Yeah, and season 5 is a little bit weird because they kind of thought they were ending with the end of season 4, so they kind of did the ending and then had to delay the last episode to the end of season 5 and did all this other stuff in season 5, which felt a little bit like it wasn't as important as the previous seasons. And that's not really on them. They literally thought they were being cancelled and then get told at the last second, hey, you're getting one more season. But yeah, seasons 1 through 4 in particular are really quite great. 2 through 4 especially. Just so much big payoff and stuff like that. The cast is wonderful. Sadly, a lot of them have passed away now, but yeah, really, really good stuff. Funnily enough, the character from Lost is in, or an actor from Lost is in this. The Frenchman from Lost is one of the main characters on Babylon 5. But this is one that I had on my to-do list for a long time because I'd heard good things about it. It seemed like something to be up my alley and that I could get into, and it was like it didn't disappoint, and it has some of the goofy elements of a sci-fi show in the 90s, but it also feels super ahead of its time in how it actually wrote the show. And it's almost like a weird thing to think about what would happen if the reboot that was supposed to go through did happen, because it would be less episodes, right? We'd be getting at most 12, 13 episodes a season, and would that benefit Babylon 5? I mean, it might in some ways, but I also think there was a lot of room for exploration and to do like individual character stories. I think it's a really special show that, I can't really compare to Deep Space Nine yet because I'm only on season 2 of Deep Space Nine. I know the comparison is there to be made, and it's something that fans of both shows, kind of a constant war on. But I finished Babylon 5, and I know it's a satisfying experience with, a lot of low budget charm, it's fair to say, but goddamn, like, the writing is excellent and very rarely ever missed for me. So yeah, Babylon 5 is number 18. Number 17, sticking with some science fiction here, is The Twilight Zone, specifically the original version of The Twilight Zone. Admittedly, do I think that any other version could make the list? I mean, I don't know. I'm a good chunk into season 1 of the 80s show. I don't know. It depends how many good episodes there are, I suppose, by the time it's done. But there's been some good episodes of that show, for sure, so far. But no, the original Twilight Zone is just so important to science fiction. That's like a really big statement to make, but it is. Like, it's like there's so many episodes of the Twilight Zone where they were just coming up with so many things for the first time that have become tropes. There's an episode where I got to the end and went, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure this inspired Final Destination. Or there's another episode where I get to the end and go, oh, that definitely inspired that Jordan Peele movie, Us. Or, so, there's just tons of episodes where you're like, wait, this is this thing, or this is the prototype for this movie that came later. There's so much of that in that show. There is duds, obviously. There's a lot of there's a ton of episodes. I mean, it's 5 seasons, but most of the seasons are like 36 episodes long. It's ridiculous. And yeah, there's some shit ones in there. Of course there is. But there's so many good ones. And the good ones are so inspirational, and so many of the filmmakers that made things in the 80s and 90s that I love, that were like, formative experiences for me, they were all growing up watching Twilight Zone. They're all inspired by Twilight Zone. And it's so fascinating to go back and watch that show and watch through it and kind of see where a lot of their influences were coming from. Or even just see the fact that Rod Serling, who made Twilight Zone, went on to write Planet of the Apes. There's a couple of episodes where you can clearly see that some of those ideas that were going to become Planet of the Apes were kind of already there. They were lingering in his mind, and he was already playing with them a little bit. And it's fascinating to see that. So, from a historical context, Twilight Zone is so important. But I also want to emphasize that so much of it, so many of the episodes are absolutely still worth watching in 2025. They still hold up. And again, much like some of these other older shows that I've been talking about, great, HD versions exist. There's a few episodes in season 2 which were shot in videotape that look like shit, but most of the show, the vast majority of the show, looks stunning now in HD. It's the high quality. It was shot in film, again, barring I think 6 episodes in season 2, so it still looks great. It's in black and white, but it looks great. There's just so many good episodes. I think the last couple of seasons had less good episodes than the first 3 seasons, but there's still a lot of good stuff in there. So yeah, Twilight Zone, super important. It covers so many different types of science fiction, so many different subgenres, and so many different ideas that it's hard not to just kind of fawn over it. And it'd be very easy, if someone made a list like this and said Twilight Zone should be number 1 because of how influential it is, I could understand their reasoning. I don't make lists like that. I can't put it that high because there's just things that mean more to me, or more important to me, or that I think are more satisfying as a television experience. And to me, a big part of television is the idea of the ongoing story, right? Whether it's 100% serialized or partially serialized, that's a big element of TV for me. So an anthology show like Twilight Zone, as much as it deserves all the respect in the world, and it should always rank high, and I completely get anyone who puts it in number 1, it's not going to get to number 1 for me, or even my top 10, because ultimately it's still an anthology show with standalone stories. And I value the format of TV is having ongoing elements, if not the entire thing being ongoing. So that's kind of where the line's being drawn here to some extent. But it's very special and important, and it's, I can't, what else do I say about Twilight Zone? So I could probably say that about most of the shows that I'm bringing up soon. So anyway, that's number 17. Number 16 is Star Trek, the original series. A little dramatic pause there before I said that. Star Trek, it's actually really weird that I ended up with this and Twilight Zone back to back, because there's a lot of similar things to say about each one. Star Trek's just a little bit later than Twilight Zone by a few years, because Twilight Zone was 59 to, I guess, 64, if I'm mapping that out right, and then Star Trek was 66, I think it started. By all means, if I'm slightly off there, I won't be off by much. But Star Trek, again, is super influential and very important, not just because it inspired a lot of modern filmmakers and things like that, and not just because it was super progressive in a time where that was tough to do on TV. Not that Twilight Zone didn't have its own progressivism sort of baked into it as well, but with Star Trek, it's this world, this utopia in the future where we've gotten rid of capitalism, and we're all just trying to do the best things for humanity and the Federation and so on and so on. But obviously Star Trek is standalone episodes, right? There wasn't much continuity. Arguably, there's maybe a little bit of character progression here or there if you're really looking for it, but not by much. That said, though, the characters are a big part of what makes Star Trek so great. That core trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And I always feel bad for McCoy. Bones always gets left out. Everyone always says Kirk and Spock are the important characters of the original series. Bones is just as important. He always was. He's such a pivotal part of that trio. And I think they're endlessly entertaining to watch. The way they bounce off of each other, and then of course all of the ideas they encounter. And much like Twilight Zone felt like it was playing in all these different sandboxes, Star Trek, it really felt like the first genuine attempt of what feels like a modern science fiction TV show, where it's okay, we've got a ship, a spaceship. This is where the entire TV show's set pretty much. And they're going to go to different locations. They're going to encounter weird things in space. I mean, if I was to describe what I think a typical episode of the original Star Trek is, I would say they encounter something in space, either a weird anomaly that they can't explain, or a different ship that's dangerous. And some of my favorite episodes of that original show are when they deal with that, because it's like a submarine episode, or it's just an episode about the mystery of what something is. And yeah, there's bad episodes. There's tons of bad episodes in Star Trek, but there's so many good episodes. And at least, unlike a Twilight Zone, when you've got a bad episode, you may still enjoy the characters because you've already fallen in love with the characters and you get to experience with them a bit more. So again, it's got a lot of charm because it is kind of the early example of a lot of these things, and you get to appreciate that. And it's got the historical context of why it's so important. But again, I think it is a very easy to watch show still in 2025. I don't think that it's difficult to do. And again, it's had a great, HD remaster where they did redo the effects, so everything looks sharp and nice and all the rest of it. It's Star Trek. Obviously there's some things that got improved upon with later shows and ideas. The Klingons look really weird and kind of racist in the original show, regardless of what the intentions were. But you always got the feeling that even if something's kind of dated in Star Trek, it always feels like there was good intentions with it at the time. And you can kind of sort of see that coming through in the effort that was being made. And from a historical perspective, that's quite interesting as well, just in and of itself, regardless of the science fiction elements that it's playing with. So, Star Trek, super important. So the original series is at number 16. Number 15 is Frasier. That's right, I've put Frasier above Cheers. I kind of go back and forth a little bit as to which I prefer. But I think ultimately I tend to side with Frasier. Although, I will say this though. Now that I'm saying that, I don't think Cheers has a bad season. I do think Frasier has a bad season. The season where Daphne, the actress Jane Leeves, who plays Daphne, was pregnant and they had to write around that, and they did a plot where she was getting fat, that season is bad. I think it gets better again after that. So I don't think it's a super big hindrance, but I do actively dislike that season. It's just it's this glaring problem, just constantly be I don't know what you do instead. Have her just visit her family and be out of the episodes for most of the season. I don't care what the excuse is, but it would have been better than the I've gotten fat plot and dealing with that. But the thing about Frasier though is that obviously Frasier Crane was a great character on Cheers, and they kind of expand upon him here. And the idea to give him a brother, Niles, who is an even worse version of him, he makes Frasier look like the normal down-to-earth guy because he's so pompous and arrogant, was genius. And you cannot say how much the performances of the actors playing these roles, particularly David Hyde Pierce, who plays Niles, making him likable, making him in the face of everything just really entertaining to watch. But then giving them a father who Cheers said that his father was dead, so they retconned that, which good because their dad is a big part of what makes that show work as well. The fact that he is this everyman who drinks beer, watches sports, whatever, the fact that he is just this polar opposite to his sons, and the entire setup at the start of the show is that he's going to be moving in with Frasier because he's got a bad leg because he got injured when he was a cop, yada yada yada. And that being the setup of these this odd couple of father and son having to live together, one who's hoity-toity and likes fancy things, the other one who does not and wants his ugly chair in front of the TV, is just a good setup. And Niles is this great counterpoint to Frasier. And and the romance, the will they won't they of Niles and Daphne's entertaining enough. And there's definitely an evolution of some things they did on Cheers, Norm had that thing in Cheers where he'd mention his wife but you'd never see her. They kind of took that up to 11 in Frasier with Niles and his wife Maris, who was definitely talked about even more than Norm's wife ever was. But that was also the backdrop of the fact that Niles was insanely attracted to Daphne, which was mostly, again, entertaining and funny and whatever. So I think Frasier just was a little bit more baiting, and the fact that it had more of a focused thing to revolve its comedy around. And what I just mean by that is that because we're dealing with these hoity-toity characters, there's more of a sort of focused through line of we're going to keep making these kind of jokes, these kind of problems that the characters are facing. And it was always fun watching Frasier and Niles get uncomfortable or get out of their element because they've been forced to do a normal thing or whatever. or them getting really uptight because their fancy dinner party's not going right, and Frasier will yell, you know, God damn it, Niles, or something. Like, it was always entertaining to watch these characters. They're because they're characters, right? They're big characters, and the performers really make the characters feel alive, but they are absolutely characters. They're not supposed to be super grounded, and that makes it work. So, yeah, Frasier, number 15. See, I told you the lighting was going to change. Admittedly, I did take a break there to try and give my voice a chance to rest. Not that it worked very well, but hey. Number 14 is The Wire. Now, this is a show that is usually on top lists of TV shows. A lot of people rate it very highly, and rightfully so. I think I wish this is the first HBO show I actually watched. Maybe not counting Curb Your Enthusiasm, but out of the prestigious dramas and things like that from HBO, I think this is the first one that I kind of sought out. And this was kind of during a period in the early 2010s when I was kind of, again, just broadening my horizons and hearing like good things about The Wire and a couple other shows, maybe one or two, which is going to pop up later on this list. And The Wire is a very dense show with lots of rich subtext. It's, the season one's about like a team of police trying to like do a wiretap on these drug dealers. But it's very in-depth with its characters. It's very methodical. It's very much kind of about the larger themes at play. Things such as, crime and, what's the word I'm looking for? Rehabilitated. That's the word I was looking for. Rehabilitated into society, that kind of thing. Anyway, so yeah, rehabilitation, crime, police, just poverty. I mean, just all these things are kind of like really heavy, and politics on top of all that, as well as the umbrella. In fact, a big part of the show is looking at the system and looking at how different like levels of the system deal, or maybe don't deal, or disregard the people who are actually like having to live in this world that is less than ideal. And you've got heroes that are more clear, or you've got flawed heroes, you've got villains, you've got like sympathetic villains. You've got like all different types of people on every side of the line. And it feels like it's a lot more nuanced than a lot of other shows you're going to watch, where it's not interested in just doing cheap drama per se. And each season kind of tackles a slightly different, larger subject in the context of something that does feel all connected. For example, season 4 really focuses on the education side. Everything's set in Baltimore, and it's all kind of about looking and examining all these different facets. It is very, very good, right? But it also does bring some of those thrills and some of the build up to things happening when you've been kind of leading up to someone turning on someone else or something like that. So it does a lot of like good TV stuff as well that's more typical, but it's got a lot more to say, and it feels like an exploration of things that the creators of the show really want to talk about and like get ideas across and make you think about the world in a slightly different way. Whether or not you completely agree with what they're trying to say, or you're just trying to kind of like parse out what you feel about this. I think there's a lot going on there, and there's a reason why it's considered such a special show, and I think that's a big part of it. So that's number 14. And number 13 is Star Trek: The Next Generation. So not too much higher than the original show. And I did have to think about this. I was like, okay, like obviously these two Star Trek shows are both appearing somewhere. What's going higher and how much higher and so on. And I think Star Trek Next Generation is like, I think the original show has a more fun vibe, and I really like the relationship of the trio of characters. And I don't know if there's a relationship on Next Gen that quite feels like a replacement for that trio sort of friendship in the original show, but Next Gen has its own things. And I think the reason why I put Next Gen a little bit higher is because I think it does evolve and improve upon what Star Trek was always trying to be. Is it feels like Next Generation can sometimes just become about the moral or ethical decisions or debates more directly. We can have Picard argue a point and have it feel quite inspiring, have it feel like they're being faced with difficult situations and so on. Now, this got a much longer run. This had 7 seasons, and I've not actually finished the show, funnily enough. I've got like half a season left. But I'm pretty confident halfway through season 7 how I feel about this show. I don't see my opinion wavering all that much. In fact, the last episode I watched was one of the worst episodes of the entire show, and it's still ranking this high, so I'm not worried about that. But you know, it does have its faults, of course. Like there's obviously stinker episodes here or there. Whenever one of the female main characters has a love interest for an episode, those usually suck. Things like that. But when it's on fire, when it's dealing with difficult ideas, or it's doing some fun larger mythology, the Borg are actually a really cool new idea. At least in their first few appearances, are really, really cool, have a lot of mystique, and are very memorable. There's a lot of cool exploration of the Klingon mythology via Worf as a main character and all that kind of thing. And it does feel like it takes some of the ideas from the original show and expands upon them, and there is this sense of continuity in the larger world of Star Trek. This idea that Klingons were, you know, enemies in the original show, but by the time Next Gen rolls around, they are allies. And that's something that then got the story of how that kind of happened is told in one of the movies that hadn't come out yet. Like Star Trek 6 came out in 1991 and told part of that story. And by that point, Next Gen was on at least season 4 or 5. So, you know, there's kind of this thing where there's this sense of connective tissue throughout the whole thing. But ultimately, it's the way it tackles ideas and the way it tackles dilemmas, moral dilemmas, ethical dilemmas, that kind of thing, and how like these arguments or debates are had, and especially when there's no clear answer. I love when they're given a difficult decision and they have to try and debate to the best possible solution, but there's no solution that is 100% perfect. You know, sometimes it's the best of a couple of bad choices, and sometimes when it does those things, it's when it really, I find it inspiring, and I think those highs that it hits when it's got a great episode doing something like that is why I rank it above the original show. Even though I do think there's stuff in the original show that I do think Next Gen is lacking in some ways, but that's what makes them both so cool to both exist, is they both have their own strengths and weaknesses. So, yeah, and I think Picard ultimately is a stronger character than Kirk, which is not to say that I'd rather he was in the original series. Not for a second. I love Kirk. I think Kirk is a great character in that show, and Picard wouldn't fit in that show. But I think overall, I would say Picard is the more like upstanding character, the more nuanced character that you get to feel like someone who's standing, you know, has convictions and is willing to stand for them and protect them as a captain. And I feel like there's almost like you can kind of get behind him as the leader and root for him as the one who's going to like run the ship and keep everyone else in the right path. And they all believe in him, and I think you believe in him in a way as well. Whereas I think in the original show, Kirk's just the action hero, the lead of the show, and you just kind of accept that he's the leader. I don't think he inspires us as a character in the same way that Picard does. So, number 13 is Star Trek: The Next Generation. Number 12, we're back to a comedy. This is Community. Now, this is a fairly recent comedy. This is a show that I fell in love with. I knew nothing about it when I started it, which was when it aired, to be fair. Like I didn't like binge this later. This was a show I was watching as it was airing and kind of like was getting into it, like kind of like liking its kind of snappy sense of humor, the jokes it would write. And there's an episode about 6 or 7 in, because that happens to be when Halloween kind of falls in a typical network TV season, where the character of Abed dresses up as Batman and does this intense, like, Christian Bale Batman impression for the whole episode. And it kind of set up something that this show would do, which not necessarily that it would reference things, although it often does. More the idea that it would have gimmick episodes and it would feel very inventive and playful, with this idea that we can have a paintball episode where it's like a war story between, like, factions in the college, or we could have, you know, like there's another like a war style episode, but it's done like a Civil War documentary where there's like still photos of this like big pillow fight that happened and things like that. Or there's like a stop motion Christmas episode that's like a little musical, and like it would do all these things. In fact, one of my favorite gimmick episodes of the whole thing is was it also a Christmas episode? It might have been, but it was basically Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but with Glee Club, and the idea that you'd be turned into a Glee Club singer, but it was like a Body Snatcher style story. Really good stuff. It felt like it was pulling in a lot of cool inspirations, but always felt snappy. The characters largely were extremely funny and likable, and I discovered a lot of actors that I like throughout this show. Namely, you know, Donald Glover, Alison Brie, and a few of the others are really good. And even Chevy Chase, who of course had some problems on the show ultimately, did have good lines. It did have like funny moments. He was a good foil for a lot of the others that did work. Now, there is a bit of a, there's a little stain on the past of this show. Season 4 is this kind of weird thing where it's not good, right? Season 4 is not good. I think 5 and 6 are good. I really like a lot of 5 and 6. It's never quite as great as those first 3 seasons, admittedly, but there's a lot of good stuff in 5 and 6. And yeah, the reason for that is all kind of sordid. Like, there's a whole thing where they fired Dan Harmon, the creator, and at the time it was like, oh, screw them, why have they done that? And then later on, it turned out that he had been kind of harassing a member of staff, which he, thankfully did kind of put out this very sort of genuine, like, long apology, kind of like talking about his like thought process and whatever, to the point where the person that he had harassed had actually accepted the apology publicly. So kind of like in the end there was a nice ending to it, but like, yeah, it was unfortunate to hear that. But I didn't know that at the time when the show was airing. I don't think anyone knew that at the time in the public. So it was very much just this weird season that's not very good. And then we got 5 and 6, and seemingly they're promising that we will get the movie, because 6 seasons in a movie became a sort of mantra. It was something Abed said in an episode, and it became something we all rooted for. It felt like it was up for cancellation every single season, and it was a treat when it wasn't. So, despite that one dodgy misstep of a season and some of the real life stuff associated with why that happened, and there was some more stuff as well. There was some feuding with Chevy Chase and some other things that might have been at play as well. I don't claim to know exactly why decisions were made at the time, and ultimately now it doesn't really matter that much. But seasons 1 through 3 are so goddamn good, and then 5 and 6 have a lot of great stuff in them, and it really felt like you could tell that Dan Harmon was back writing when he went to season 5. It felt like all of a sudden things were a bit better again. And, there's some great stuff. Keith David's in season 6 as a regular character. It was a shame to lose some cast members a little bit late in the show, but some of the ones we got instead were also really good. There was a lot of great things in there. It was very playful and appealed to my kind of taste and sensibilities in a lot of ways. So, yeah, Community, number 12. Really special and just kind of clicked with me in a very quick, instantaneous way. Number 11 is Fringe. Now, Fringe is interesting because Fringe started a few years into Lost. Or maybe near the end. It was like 2008, 2009. So it was quite near the end of Lost. And it was also something that J.J. Abrams technically was part of the creating team of, but like he directed the pilot and then he left, and he had nothing to do with the rest of the show, right? There was other showrunners running the show who actually went on to do a 1-season show on NBC that I quite liked and sadly got cancelled at the end of the season. Debris was the name of that show, and I was getting some Fringe vibes from that, and I was really kind of digging that show as not as a perfect season, but like this is like a season 1 to a show that might get really, really good. But then it got cancelled, which is a shame. But Fringe is excellent. Like, Fringe, like, if you'd asked me when Fringe started that I was going to one day say Fringe was better than Lost, I would have told you were insane. I would not have guessed that from the first episode, and even from the entire first season, because the first season is okay. It's a lot of, like, standalone episodes. It's a lot of, people compare it to the X-Files at the time, because it's a lot of, hey, weird things going on, we go investigate it, we're like paranormal investigators. But once you get to season 2, and there's a few shows that I like that are kind of like this. I mentioned this with Chuck in the first part of this countdown, but the idea that some network shows like are kind of shaky and a bit more generic in season 1, it's almost like to get past the ad executives and the studio execs, they have to give them something more generic because that's what studios like. The TV networks like generic TV that can appeal to anyone. But they kind of slyly put in the ongoing stuff a little bit by little. And then season 2 is where things really start to kick off, because now you've got an established audience and they feel a little bit more bold and they can start putting in the more interesting stuff. And that's exactly what happened with Fringe. Fringe takes off like a rocket ship in season 2. When it starts to get to the longer form storytelling, there's some of it was hinted at earlier and even in season 1, but there's a point about 15 or 16 episodes into season 2 where it gets legitimately fantastic, and the last chunk of season 2 is phenomenal, and then that just kind of carries forward. Season 3 is fantastic. I know some people had trouble with some of season 4's like sort of basic setup, but I still liked a lot of that. I like how it played with things. Season 5 does have a little bit of a problem in that, Fringe was another show that was on the verge of cancellation like every season pretty much, And we were so thankful that they announced a shorter fifth and final season. So we got this final 13 episode season, but obviously their budgets had been cut dramatically, and you could sort of tell that they kind of like spent like 2/3 of that season being as cheap as humanly possible. And I do think this the first half of season 5 or so is kind of like we just have to make do with very little because we're saving everything for the last run of episodes. But I really want to assure you that the last run of episodes, the last like 4 or 5 episodes of Fringe, I loved. I think they're great, and I think they play off in a lot of things that made that show special. I think it's one of the most satisfying endings I've ever had of a long running network TV show. I mean, it's only 5 seasons, but that's long in the sense of like, I think once you're at 5 seasons, it's it feels like a longer show, especially when you've got 22 episode seasons for most of it. But it's a show that played with different ideas, alternate realities, time travel, weird like scientific inventions that could do weird shit, and like had a lot of continuity. Once it started really playing with that, and you got this sense of we could have different kinds of episodes, and that was something that really came into it with the end of season 2 into season 3, is that we'd have an episode in one universe, and then it would like do an episode in the other universe, and you'd have a different like opening titles to match it. And there was like a moment later in a later episode, I won't spoil what it is, where there'd be like a third version of opening titles. Well, technically the fourth at that point because of the flashback episode, but whatever. And you'd be like, wait, whoa, what are we doing in this episode? Because the opening titles weren't red or blue, they were black. What does that mean? And that was so exciting. So it kind of, I felt like it benefited from Lost already existing in that it had like some mystery and it had some stuff to answer, but it kind of refined it and reined it in a lot, so it wasn't so sprawling that things could be answered. There was conclusions, there were ideas behind everything. And by the end, you kind of fell in love with the characters. I mean, ultimately, Walter Bishop is, I think one of the best TV characters there is. His relationship to his son Peter, this idea that he's basically a mad scientist who's making up for a lot of bad mistakes that he made in the past by trying to fix things now, and then all just the different science fiction ideas that get rolled into it as well. Just very entertaining, good music, and I love that my favorite episode of the show is like a standalone episode in season 2. It really is quite something, because I do think the serialized elements are why I love the show so much, but there's just this great standalone episode in season 2 that's my favorite. And it does get referenced in some way again later, but like not in the same way that it normally would. So yeah, Fringe, love it. I think it's a very satisfying experience, and it's the type of show, and I talked about this in part 1, how there's not a lot of these 22 episode network shows that have good serialized elements that are satisfying and aren't just these procedurals that are like CSI, NCIS, and all that. I think Fringe is not the last of its kind. I said Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was that, and I stick by that, but it very much feels like that to me. Or, and the one that kind of started halfway through Fringe and is also a fairly recent one is Person of Interest, which, Person of Interest isn't on this list, and I think it would be. I think when I finish Person of Interest, I think it'll easily be on my top 50. But I'm like literally halfway through that show right now. It feels weird to judge it because it's so serialized, and I don't know where the ending is, and I had to just make that call that I wasn't as confident on picking that for a place in this list yet. But Fringe is phenomenal. Yeah, there you go, number 11, which means we're into the top 10 now. So hey, this is the big stuff. This is where we get to the real juicy meat and potatoes. So number 10 of my top TV shows of all time is The Shield. Now, The Shield is a show about a corrupt cop, Vic Mackey, and his little team, including Walton Goggins, who plays Shane. And it's these corrupt cops. The episode 1 does like a really great job of giving you this big hook at the end to sort of set up what the show is. But it's these corrupt cops that you kind of also can sympathize with at times, because they do sometimes do good things, but they're also out for themselves. And in many ways, I see this show as a prototype to Breaking Bad. And what I mean by that is that it's a show of anti-heroes that are trying to keep the secret of what they're up to from everyone else. And they're not completely villainous necessarily, but they do some bad things. They do a lot of bad things even. And when things spiral, when people get close to the truth of what they're up to, it might make them get worse and do bad things. And a lot of that hiding stuff from the other characters did make me think, or I did think of that when I was watching Breaking Bad after the fact. This was a show that I didn't watch when it aired. I actually watched this like either right before or right after The Wire. It was right around that same time where I just kind of watched the whole show over the course of a couple of months, something like that. Really good stuff, really strong stylistic elements. And I think season 5, it's a 7-season show, and season 5 in particular, I think stands out as being just a phenomenal season of TV. Forrest Whitaker's in that season as someone who's investigating like the main characters, and the tension and that game of cat and mouse is so good. Not to mention that, you know, it's a gritty show. It feels like, you know, it was on FX, so it's not quite HBO in terms of swearing and violence, but it could be a lot rougher than what you get on network. And the subjects that it tackled sometimes were definitely a lot more mature. You know, there's a lot of sort of racism stuff in the show. There's sexual stuff in the show. Some of the criminals they go after would be doing very, very particular nasty things that they would discuss about. And these were all themes that were in the show as well, on top of everything else. Now, it's just, it's funny to me, like, when I look at the show and it's 7 seasons, I do think it maybe went one season too long, which is not to say that I think season 7's bad itself. It's more just that I think season 6 and 7 could have probably been condensed down to one season, and maybe FX wanted to milk it a little bit, so we got like 2 seasons, and like I think one of them's kind of extended as well. That said, though, the final episode is perfect. The final episode is a perfect ending to the show. I think season 5 is my favorite season, and the season 5 finale might be my favorite episode of the show. But the ending is perfect. It's exactly what it should have been. I can't, you know, praise it enough. I think it's great TV. It's one that I think hardcore TV viewers know The Shield, but I don't think it's broke into the mainstream the way that even The Wire has, never mind a Breaking Bad, where, you know, super mainstream popularity. And it's a shame because it kind of deserves it. The Shield is really, really goddamn good. Plus, there's a bunch of like guest stars and stuff that are really good, and other regulars that you might recognize from other things. But this is where I learned of Walton Goggins, who of course has went on to have a very good career following this. Yeah. For some reason, it just popped into my head that he once uses an alias, maybe more than once. He uses an alias and he goes by Cletus Van Damme. And I just remember thinking that there should be a TV show where the two characters are called Cletus Van Damme and Ark Vandelay. Because Ark Vandelay is the alias that George uses in Seinfeld when he wants to pretend to be an architect. And I don't know why I thought of those two things together, but I just did. I just thought, oh, I should be silly and write a script where it's all aliases that characters use, but not the actual character names. I don't know. Anyway, I'm rambling. The Shield is excellent. Number 9 is The Expanse. I love The Expanse. The Expanse is a science fiction show set in the future where space travel's become a thing, but it's not like Star Trek where we're going light years to other galaxies and things like that. It's all very localized. It's basically, there's a colony on Mars. Mars has kind of become its own nation, effectively. Earth is kind of one big nation now. It's just Earth. It's the world. It's the UN. And then the rim, the outer rim, is kind of where all of the poorer people live, and they're like doing all the mining, but they're kind of mistreated by people back on the any world. They refer to Mars and Earth as the innies of the solar system. But there's so much mythology here. There's kind of like an alien element that's kind of introduced. But the thing that stands out about The Expanse, one, is very good writing and very strong in the sense of like the people writing it really love the science behind a lot of what they're talking about. So there's a lot of really well researched things. Seemingly, I mean, I'm not an expert, but it definitely, whenever we got comments on episodes and we talk about how they did something in the episode, normally people in the comments would be backing up and saying, hey, no, they're right about this. This is why they've done it this way, is because this is how actual space travel would work, or this is at least theoretically how this would work. The physics would dictate this, and there's a lot of that. The effects are great. For a TV show that was on Sci-Fi and then later Amazon when it kind of got saved after cancellation, the effects are spectacular, and adding to that, it has the best space combat that I've ever seen in anything. Whenever they'd have space battles where they'd be firing rounds at each other from ship to ship, It always looked great. It was always easy to follow, and they would use the dynamics of what space travel is to work in the fights. Like you'd have them slingshotting around moons and things like that, or whatever, and it always felt exciting. It always felt big. But they also never made it feel like everything was easy. I always felt like this was difficult, and it takes a lot out of them. They have to be strapped to a chair, and just all these little details that made it feel grounded in a way that felt special for a show set in space. But then on top of that, you also had the really great character dynamics and the politics of like Earth versus Mars versus the Outies, invading for control and having like practically a terrorist group, but one that you could kind of sympathize with because like the Outies are mistreated and disregarded in this like grasp for power, but then people who are going too far, and like you really get attached to your heroes by the time you get into the later seasons, and you're like, I think it's really wonderful stuff. I know like some people really didn't like later on in the show, but I actually think season 5 is one of my favorite seasons of that damn thing. Season 5 I think is wonderful. So I love The Expanse, and there's always the possibility of a sequel show because The Expanse is based on a series of books, and the 6 seasons correlate to the first 6 books. Now they don't match 1-to-1; they kind of like move things around and stuff. But there's a time jump, and there is 3 more stories they could tell someday if they want to spend the money on it. But if they don't, the ending still kind of works, even though part of us all kind of wants to see like that next part. Now I haven't read the books. I love the show. I didn't want to like muddy it by like also reading the books as well. Maybe I will someday, but the show, the aesthetic of the show, the characters, the world building, the mythology of the different like factions is so good. In many ways, like when I was talking about Babylon 5 earlier, I feel like The Expanse is tapping into a lot of the same things I like about that. But while Babylon 5 feels a little bit more fantastical in how it presents all these alien races and stuff like that, Expanse is going for a more grounded, based in science kind of approach, whilst also tackling a lot of the same broad themes and topics of politics, religion, all that kind of stuff. So, Expanse is wonderful, and that is my number 9. Number 8 is Parks and Recreation. Yep. Yeah, I love Parks and Rec. I think, funnily enough, obviously it gets compared to The Office a lot, because it even originally was maybe going to be a spin-off of The Office, and then wasn't. But it is similar in the sense that it has that first little 6-episode season that's not very good. Like, there's a couple of laughs in season 1 of Parks and Rec, but honestly, even if you rewatch it, as soon as you hit episode 1 of season 2, it just clicks into place. Like, something about the jokes, the humor, the way the characters are being written just feels right. Like, something shifted in the writing, and I'm not even sure I can pinpoint what it is. But immediately, the Leslie feels like Leslie, the Ron feels like Ron, the April feels like April, all that stuff. But the show's so good, it does the mockumentary thing of the talking heads to camera, although it does it in a way where it's never really about, oh, they're making a documentary. Like, there's never any expansion beyond we're doing these talking to camera bits. But the characters are just so good. Ron Swanson is such a hilarious character. He's that dry typical, like, I love Holt in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but Ron is kind of the best of that type of character. The boss who's very stern, very strong character type. And even like other characters in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you can kind of correlate. Like, Rosa's kind of the new April in a lot of ways, and I love Rosa in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but I really love Aubrey Plaza as April in Parks and Rec. So I think what's so good about it is that it does that thing that even like The Simpsons did, where there's so many like running gags and like minor characters in the town of Pawnee that kind of get brought back up later, like their hatred of libraries, or just like, the diner that Leslie always goes to, JJ's Diner. And just all these little references that can kind of be built up and like sort of reference back upon themselves at a later time. I think the show gets stronger as it goes in a lot of ways, at least to the point where you get to season 4 and 5, and there's just really great longer form stories happening over the seasons, but without sacrificing any of the comedy. And the comedy is very funny. Like, I've been rewatching the show. I'm on season 5 right now. Season 4 is still my favorite season, because that's the one where Leslie's like running for councilwoman, and it just gives the season this really neat through line throughout the entire thing. But like, there's just it's a show that builds up so many great running gags and uses them just the right amount so that you're always happy to see them return, and it always just kind of makes you feel warm and fuzzy, because the characters are also very likable for the most part. There's something very good natured about Parks and Rec, and when Leslie finally like melts Ron's heart a little bit and makes him admit something good or something, like it's always so pleasing to get through those moments. It's it's weird praising a sitcom in a lot of ways, because I find it hard to say much beyond just the jokes are funny, the characters are endearing, and the overall vibes are great. But I think looking at it now as well, with a slightly older perspective and paying a bit more attention to politics, like Leslie's enthusiasm for government and wanting to be a positive force for change and having to like fight some of the bullshit things she fights in that show, and it's all played for laughs in the show and it's very funny. But as more time goes on, some of the weird things that people fight her on feel more and more realistic as time has went on. Like, yeah, I can see some idiot arguing this now because of just how weird and stupid politics have gotten, particularly in the US, but like it's not just the US. It just, I don't know, it's just really endearing to me in a lot of ways, and there's just kind of like a hopefulness to it. And I think you watch the show, and Leslie's not my favorite character by any means. She's not even in my top 3 characters probably in that show. But Leslie's such a strong positive force at the center that I think at the end of the show, I think we'd all be better if there's a few more Leslie Nopes actually trying to fix the countries that they're in. Like, it really would make the world a better place if there's a few more of her. Yeah, that's really sweet. There's a great moment actually towards the end of season 4 that I'll point out here, where Parks and Rec's mostly a really funny show and it's kind of heartwarming and endearing. But there's a moment towards the end of season 4 when she's running for office and she gets to vote for herself, and the show just like stops being funny for a minute, and it just like gives her a quiet moment as she tears up as she's going to vote for herself, because she's dreamed of this moment her entire life. And it's just one of those things where you know that a sitcom is really nailing it when it can just stop being a sitcom for a minute and give you a genuine little character dramatic moment and not have to like, I mean, there's a joke afterwards. It's not like there's no joke at all like surrounding it. But for 30 seconds to a minute, just let that moment sit, because the characters kind of earned it, and we've all grown attached enough that it means something to us, and it's nice to feel a little invested in the plot, and in the characters, and in a way beyond just they make me laugh. So the fact that you can get to that point after just mostly jokes with these characters is always kind of special when you hit that. So number 8 is Parks and Recreation. Number 7 is one that I think most of the Americans are going to scratch their heads at because they've probably never heard of it, bizarrely. But I would not be true to myself if I didn't admit that number 7 is Only Fools and Horses. This is a British comedy. It's a British sitcom that never really cracked the US in the way that some others have had. Not that like any of them have went mainstream, but some Americans have heard of IT Crowd and stuff like that. Only Fools and Horses is super British, and I'm not typically into super British things for one reason or the other. But I grew up watching Only Fools and Horses, and the basic premise of this is that it's two, like, sort of, low-income brothers, an older brother and a younger brother who live with their grandfather in a council estate, poor housing in London. And the older brother's like a wheeler and dealer who goes to the market and sells goods, and I'm using that term very loosely. It tends to be stuff that doesn't work or is broken, possibly stolen, but it's a comedy, and it's all about that hijinks they get into and what he gets his younger brother Rodney into. They're with their grandfather for the first 3 seasons of the show, and then the actor who played the grandfather died, and he was replaced with their uncle Albert, who I actually like more than the grandfather, honestly. I think he just was funnier, to be honest. But, and there's a sense of continuity to it, and it's a British show, so the seasons were only 6 or maybe 8 episodes at most for some of them. But they did a lot of specials. So the show started in the early 80s, and originally it finished in 1996. So there was 7 seasons of shorter seasons because they're British, but there was a lot of one-off specials at Christmases and New Year's and things like that were an hour long, sometimes a 90-minute episode, and I know that sounds crazy because it's a comedy, Imagine like an American sitcom doing a 90-minute movie is like an in-between seasons special, but that's something that Only Fools and Horses would do, where they'd go on like a trip somewhere. There's even like one of the specials was like not a heist episode, but it was like he accepted a job transporting like stolen diamonds, and there was like police involved, and it was such a weird plot, but it was quite funny, and it kind of meant we got an episode where they were on a boat for a while going to going across to Amsterdam, I want to say. But it was very willing to do these things where it would put them into these situations, and I don't think I can really sell you on it. All I can say is that it was immensely funny. Like it knew how to do running gags, it knew how to have character traits, but it was all these things. Like anyone who's ever watched Only Fools and Horses, if I say the chandelier, they will know the scene I'm talking about. They will remember it. It's impeccable stuff. One of my favorite moments, which is in the original sort of trilogy of specials they did to end it in '96. The reason why I say original ending is because they did like another series of 3 episodes in the early 2000s, which weren't as good, honestly. I kind of wish they never did those, but it's only 3 episodes, so whatever. But there's an episode from 1996 where they're dressed as Batman and Robin for a costume thing of some kind, and they end up breaking down in their van. They've got a signature 3-wheeled van that they drive around. And there's a moment where this councilwoman's being mugged, and they come running out of the smoke or the mist, dressed as 1960s style Batman and Robin, as the Batman and Robin theme from that show starts playing. And this woman stands there in shock as she's technically just been saved by Batman and Robin because they've ran off. And it's a really funny moment, right? I laugh out loud at that moment. But the payoff to that, just to ruin one joke here, is that later on, because other plot things have happened, the main character is getting a medal, I think, at like the town hall for something. And this councilwoman walks into the room, looks up at the stage, and sees the main character, Del Boy, without his mask. And she looks up and dead seriously says, "It's Batman." It's such a good payoff. Like, I don't know if any comedy I've ever watched has done setup and payoff the way that Only Fools and Horses did. Now, it did start in the early 80s. There's some things that have aged a little bit in terms of, like, a little problematic line here or there. It's... Although a lot of that stuff has been kind of cut out, or at the very least some music moments have been cut out because they don't want to pay for the rights to songs that they had back then or whatever, which is really annoying, actually, for watching it. There's a couple of moments in a few episodes that are butchered if you try and watch any of the sort of the modern versions of them, which is a real shame. But yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if an American would find it funny. It may just be too British for that. But of all the British shows, and there's been a few that were early down on the list, this was the one that I knew was going to be high up, and it's just got a kind of a place in my heart because of just how lovable the antics of the Trotter brothers are. So yeah, so don't worry, I'm back to things you've probably heard of after this, although for people in the UK, I'm sure you all enjoyed hearing me praise it for a minute. And number 6 is Firefly. I love Firefly, and the tragedy of it only being the one season will forever haunt my nightmares. That said, though, it did create this thing where I don't know if I've ever had quite the special theater going experience that I did when I saw Serenity. Like, getting that movie after this show was a genuinely kind of almost emotional experience that very few movies like elicit out of me. There's some that are kind of in the ballpark, and I don't want to list anything or anything, but it was a truly special thing to get some form of conclusion, because it's only like 14 episodes, it's very easy to rewatch because there's not a lot of it, but it's insane just how quickly those characters felt fully fleshed out, how likable most of them were, how insanely funny, just like Buffy and Angel, the show was. And in some ways, I think if Firefly had gotten its full run, its full 5, 6, 7 season run that maybe was dreamed up at the time, like, I genuinely wonder like where I'd be putting it if I had the whole show for context. But even in its state, the episodes we get are so good, and I love the characters so much that it still gets to number 6. It just is that fantastic to me. It's almost like everything that was learned on those previous shows was like just like made this even more refined and just hit the ground running. It didn't need that weak first season to really like click in season 2. It just was there. It was there basically instantly, and it's a crying shame that it only got the one season. Out of Gas is my favorite episode, just for anyone wondering, of Firefly. And I know it's weird praising these shows now because the real life stuff with Whedon and whatnot. So I try not to specifically praise him when I'm talking about them now, even though it's very much like his craft that is why I like them so much. But it's like the show means so much to me that I like it. Just it's separate from that. It just the aesthetic, the sense of humor, the like and even Nathan Fillion. Like I mean, all the cast are great. But like Nathan Fillion is just like perfect as Malcolm Reynolds in so many ways. That mix of the aloofness, but also able to get serious and whatever. It's just everything. It's lightning in a bottle, and it's a shame that bottle was smashed prematurely. Like it was just crushed on by Fox. Like I hate them. I hate them so much. Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. But anyway, if you want to hear me talk about Firefly some more, I forced Connor to review all of it with me, including the movie, and those reviews went long. So if you want to go and see a very, very in-depth discussion of every line of dialogue that I liked in that show, you can go check that out in the playlists. All right, number 5 is Breaking Bad. Now, you probably knew this was coming. I love Breaking Bad. It's I think it's one of those shows that there's almost like a little bit of like a backlash just because it is so beloved that some people have to come out and say, oh, it's kind of overrated. Everyone loves Breaking Bad. It's not as good as this other 2 or 3 things that I really like. It's always weird when that happens because sometimes it happens to a show I love, sometimes it happens to something that I don't care about, and I don't want to be in either side of the like this sort of backlash kind of mentality. Either I like something or I didn't like something. I really don't give a shit what the general like consensus of it is. It's always nice to know that other people are loving something and like giving it the respect that you think it deserves. Don't get me wrong, but like I feel no need to fight back against that. Whatever you think it's overrated, fine. Like go and be yourself. I think Breaking Bad is great from the start. I think some people think it doesn't click until a little bit in. But I think episode 1's a great pilot, and I think specifically it's episode 3 where there's a whole sequence where they've got someone captured and he's reforming a plate. I don't want to spoil too much or anything, but I'll just say there's a part where he has to reform a plate, and I think that scene is where the magic of Breaking Bad really hit me with how good the writing and the direction was to really sell simple ideas visually that had context for what the story had already been doing. And like that's something that would just continue throughout the entire show is the exceptional writing and direction to have the tension rise, put Walt in these predicaments. It's a great character study, but it's also very thrilling. It's exceptional stuff, and I think by the time you get to season 3, it's just firing on all cylinders. So I do think it gets better. Like I'm not saying that it's at its best as soon as it starts, but I don't think it takes time to warm up. If anything, I think season 2 feels a little slow, and they sort of like realized how to like pace it better with season 3. But season 1, I think, hits the ground running really well. Obviously, it kind of ends in a weird place because of the writer's strike, so it just kind of ends suddenly and then picks up with season 2. So season 1 and 2 feel like one big season in a lot of ways because of that. But no, like obviously, great, tremendous cast. Some of whom obviously would go on to be in the spin-off, and because they were so entertaining in Breaking Bad. As a career-defining performance from Bryan Cranston, he is exceptional as Walter White. It's a wonderful character arc to follow and sort of understand the nuance of and realize what you're actually watching at a certain point where you realize oh, it's not this kind of story, it's that kind of story, and it just is so satisfying as a result. So, Breaking Bad, I do not think is overrated. I think it's legitimately one of the best TV shows ever made. I think it's exceptional, and I, yeah, I love The Shield. I think Breaking Bad came along basically right around the time that was finishing. I don't even know if it finished yet, and said, "Hey, okay." I don't know if Vince Gilligan even watched The Shield, but just I think there's like some connections in my head because I can see some similarities with how it handles its plot, and type of character, the type of anti-hero that it's following, and the secrets that he's keeping. But yeah, just exceptional stuff. Like it knows when to just stop talking and just let a look tell you what you need to know. Uh, I just it's great. Yeah. So that's number 5, and number 4 is Twin Peaks. Now, this is actually not a new show by any means, but it's one that I only watched. Well, it's 8 years ago now. Oh God, I'm going to be dead soon. It's 8 years ago since Twin Peaks: The Return. But me and Connor reviewed Twin Peaks from the start, and we started in January 2017, and we finished the original 2 seasons and the movie just about a week or so before season 3 started. And I have to say that as far as my TV memories go, that journey of starting Twin Peaks in January and then going all the way through to the new episodes releasing weekly to the end of that new season in early September is one of my favorite TV memories of my entire life. Discussing that show, theorizing, talking about themes, talking about the weird things Lynch is doing, what things might mean or represent, quirky creative choices, and whatever else was such a great thing. And then that 3rd season as well, which I'm including here, I don't think they're separate shows, right? They are one show. I'm kind of including the movie as well, to be honest. But if you want to discount that, I kind of get it because it's a movie. But season 3, I think, is phenomenal. I think season 3 is the best season. I think the choices made in that season, acknowledging that time has passed and we can't just do the same show again, it felt like Lynch had something new to say. And, sadly, we have now come to learn that that would be his swan song. But in many ways, it felt like a swan song because it was like he was tapping into all these ideas that he'd had, not only in Twin Peaks, but in all of the different movies that he'd made prior. It felt like this big, like, summary of his entire career. And there was moments that were horrifying suddenly because he's so good at doing that. There's obviously lots of things to read into and analyze and think about and just, but the experience of talking about that show week to week and getting to do it continuously from the previous show without the wait. And because there's a moment at the end of season 2 of Twin Peaks where a character actually says, "I'll see you again in 25 years." And I swear I nearly fell out of my chair because I'm like, wait, that's almost the exact number of years until the new season, which is starting in a couple of weeks' time. What the hell? How did Lynch do that? And obviously it wasn't, it's more coincidence than anything. It's lucky that worked out that way. But it blew my mind. And that was a show where it did continuously blow my mind. And I can't help but like just love it almost unconditionally. And obviously, yeah, there's a big chunk of season 2 which is absolute trash because the actual creators had nothing to do with a lot of it. But it doesn't matter. Like where season 2 ends is important to get to. The movie's phenomenal. I think the movie was harshly judged at the time because everyone wanted a continuation and it was a prequel. But it was easy for me to watch it when I did because I knew the new season was coming the week later. So I was just like, it's fine. I'll enjoy this for what it is. And I actually think that movie is haunting and it's probably the some of the darkest stuff that's in Twin Peaks is in that movie and really explores the backstory to it. And it's an iconic show for several reasons. And I kind of love that we got that 3rd season and how weird it is. And a lot of people who wouldn't normally watch that sort of weird David Lynch-esque stuff got hooked with when it was a slightly more normal TV show from before and might have hated that new season, but they gave it a try because it was the 3rd season of Twin Peaks. And for me, it did everything. Like everything it did was stuff that I couldn't have predicted, which made it all the better because Lynch knew better than I did. He had better ideas. He had more to say. And episode 8 is one of the best TV episodes of all time. of the return. So Twin Peaks, exceptional, once in a lifetime experience. I will enjoy rewatching that someday, and yeah, great. So there we go. Number 3. Things are getting hairy now. We're top 3 material. Number 3 is Better Call Saul. Oh, these decisions were really tough, and the first thing I did with these two shows, of course, with this and Breaking Bad, was decide, okay, which one's higher. And I sat and I thought about it, and I thought about it a lot. But ultimately, I came down that Breaking Bad is phenomenal. It is an exceptional TV experience, and it is kind of a model of how I want prestige TV to function. Better Call Saul is the people behind Breaking Bad having learned and already done it. Put all those skills to use in a new show. And while prequels normally suck, and while doing a spin-off to a show after the fact can just be a complete misfire, and just feel like you're milking a cash cow, and it'll feel hollow because of that. These people are talented. These people went into Better Call Saul and said, what is this show about? What is the arc of Saul, or Jimmy McGill, who would become Saul Goodman? And it's exceptionally well done, and it's so consistent, right? In a way that Breaking Bad isn't. Now, Breaking Bad arguably has even higher highs in some cases, but Better Call Saul is so easy to watch. It's like sliding through warm butter, because the visual style, the confidence in the direction, the way it builds its plots, and then on top of all that, you have these phenomenal character arcs of not just Saul, and that's the beauty of this, is that Kim feels like she's just as strong a character with just as much nuance and just as much like this. It's really a 2-person show, 3 people even if you include Mike, and Mike's plots are often very separate to all the other stuff, but everything is just so well handled in it. It's like shocking. I think it was event TV viewing when it was on, and it's sort of like you were skeptical getting into season 1 because, hey, it's a spin-off and what's it going to be? But by the time you were getting to season 2 and it was doing some of these great things of watching how the gears turn in Jimmy's head, or even Mike's head, the relationship he had with his brother and how that developed and how important it is for the entire show is just phenomenal stuff. And arguably like Breaking Bad, but I think even better than Breaking Bad, the way it nails the ending, right? Because Breaking Bad, I like the ending a lot in Breaking Bad. There's a lot of great stuff there. I think Better Call Saul nails the ending. It takes the same sort of idea of the character finally getting to the end of their arc and looking back at what the show has been. And Breaking Bad had that as well, but I think Saul nails it. And it's all about a character who is not really admitting things about himself. So getting to the point where maybe he will admit that to himself is so cathartic and so satisfying that it's just, there's nothing else quite like it. It is an example of why serialized storytelling is so amazing. Is something like Better Call Saul, where you can develop these in-depth characters over 6 seasons of a TV show and have everything feel like a big deal. Have everything feel like you've been building to something and you knew where you were going. It's just wonderful stuff. So that is Better Call Saul. Number 2 is Mr. Robot. Now, Mr. Robot is a show about a hacker. And there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of which is a spoiler, because there's reveals and twists and whatnot. So I can't really get into it too much, but this is another show that is a really strong character study, and I think most great TV shows are in a lot of ways, because you spend so much time with a character that's if you focus your storytelling on that, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're getting in deep with them, you're getting what's inside their head and what's making them tick. And literally, in some ways, in this case. But it's got a great supporting cast as well, of characters who are really relevant to the story. And I think what's so great about this is that it starts off really edgy, almost feeling David Fincher-esque in a lot of ways. But as the show goes on, there's more heart, there's more things going on about what it's about. But it also gets really playful. It's almost got a little bit of that Community thing going, actually, where it started kind of doing like certain episodes that felt like, okay, this is the gimmick episode in this way. And it'll be, here's an episode where no one talks the entire episode. Here's an episode that's done all in one take. Here's an episode that's done in this, like a play in 5 acts. It would do these sort of gimmick, sort of like, wraparounds of episodes to give them kind of like a sort of sense in the idea of the larger scheme of the show. And you always knew you were onto a big important episode when you got one of those. When you realized you were in one of them, it was like, oh, this is a big deal, this one. And it, when it does kind of reveal its hand of what it's actually doing with some of its main characters, I think the way it evolves that and like does new things with it, because it establishes certain rules and you sort of play with dynamics between various characters. I'm being very vague here because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's 4 seasons long, and I think that it does have a fantastic ending. I think admittedly, I think there's like 3 episodes before the last 2 episodes that I think I like even more than the last episode, because it has kind of like a 2-stage ending. And I think stage 1 of the ending I find extremely exciting and satisfying, and I really like the final ending. But the like, I don't know, it's interesting, but everything's good. Like, it's all good stuff. Like, the only real complaints I could make about Mr. Robot is season 2 is a little bit uneven and maybe a little self-indulgent, and that's the complaints that were kind of addressed as soon as season 3 hit, because it felt like it maybe spun its wheels a little bit and whatnot. Season 3, all those problems were gone, and honestly, season 3 and 4 are my 2 favorite seasons of the show. I think this is a great example of mistakes, some small mistakes, because there's a lot of, season 2 is full of great stuff, but there's some mistakes made in maybe pacing and some conceptual things that felt a little dragged out, and I think those complaints were addressed. Like, they clearly saw the reaction to certain things. Sam Esmail, who created the show and wrote it and directed a silly number of the episodes, I think, he looked at the mistakes made and like learned from them, and the show got better for it. Like, it surpassed what season one even was. And honestly, like, Rami Malek, who plays the lead role of Elliot, like, there's a lot of good cast members in there. Kristen Slater's in there. I forget the name of the actress who plays Darlene, but she's very good. But Rami Malek, like, obviously he's in more movies now. People are starting to know him more in the mainstream, but he will always be Elliot from Mr. Robot to me. This was his starring vehicle. This is like his tour de force, where he gets to do all these great things because he's playing this complex character who's kind of socially awkward and like has all this baggage and like inner turmoil that we're going to explore and all that stuff. Like, I don't think anything he ever does is going to surpass what he did in Mr. Robot for me. Which is not to say that I won't enjoy what he does in the future. I'm sure I will. I hope I do. I never saw the Queen movie because it looked not good, but like, I hope he is good in other stuff and he gets a chance to flex his muscles. But Mr. Robot is truly special. It's kind of a mix of a lot of different things that I love in TV. A strong sense of mythology, because there is kind of like a larger like world of hackers and like corporate greed that we kind of deal with in the show, which only feels more relevant now, honestly. And then it's also got the character arc and sort of the character analysis element of a good TV show, but it also has kind of the playfulness of something, like I said, like a Community, where it does like sort of special episodes doing different things, but in a much more serious, dramatic context. It feels like it's playful with its filmmaking, but also doing good serialized TV writing. It's got a little bit of all the things I love about good TV in there. So Mr. Robot's number 2. There it is. So I guess I'll do a quick rundown before I say number 1. So here's the list so far, everyone. Number 50, Handmaid's Tale, Season 1. Number 49, Westworld, Season 1. 48, Red Dwarf. 47, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. 46, Mr. Bean. 45, Ted Lasso. 44, Mindhunter. 43, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. 42, Homecoming, specifically Season 1. 41, Squid Game. 40, The OA. 39, Chuck. 38, The Boys. 37, Severance. 36, Black Mirror. 35, Arrested Development. 34, Battlestar Galactica. 33, Dark. 32, The Leftovers. 31, The IT Crowd. 30, Curb Your Enthusiasm. 29, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. 28, Chernobyl. 27, Father Ted. 26, Seinfeld. 25, Angel. 24, Third Rock from the Sun. 23, Travelers. 22, Lost. 21, Stranger Things. 20, Cheers. 19, Batman the Animated Series. 18, Babylon 5. 17, The Twilight Zone. 16, Star Trek the Original Series. 15, Frasier. 14, The Wire. 13, Star Trek The Next Generation. 12, Community. 11, Fringe. 10, The Shield. 9, The Expanse. 8, Parks and Recreation. 7, Only Fools and Horses. 6, Firefly. 5, Breaking Bad. 4, Twin Peaks. 3, Better Call Saul. 2, Mr. Robot. And number 1 is the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Look, I, at different times, have tried to sort of consider that Buffy isn't my favourite show and that technically other things have surpassed it in some ways, right? Obviously, the larger character stories of some of these shows that I've just had in the last few entries are arguably more impressive or more special from a writing standpoint than Buffy is. But at a certain point, there's also something else you have to consider here, and that is the importance of the show in your life, perhaps when you specifically watched it. And the simple fact is that Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the reason why I'm talking about TV shows now. Because it was the first TV show that wasn't a kid's show. Obviously, I watched kids' shows and cartoons or whatever when I was a kid. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was the first, I don't want to call it, say, adult show, because it's not, it is kind of still obviously suitable for teens and stuff, but it's the first show that as a young person, and I was still a kid at the time, that I got obsessed with. That I started watching, started falling in love with the characters, getting really invested in the plots. It was the first show that I ever was like, I have to own this. I have to get the DVDs, the box sets. I have to have access to this. I want to be able to rewatch it. I want to be able to watch all the episodes in order and not rely on the TV repeats that I'd started watching it with. And so on. Because the show had been on for a couple of seasons at least, maybe, it may have even been in season 4 when I started watching some repeats of the first couple of seasons. But I definitely watched season 5 onwards as it aired. I remember doing that. And Angel likewise alongside. But I went out of my way to sort of obsess over it and get into it. And that's why, I referenced a couple of times as I was talking about other shows here, that when Buffy and Angel ended, and that was the one 2 shows technically, but that was the one thing I was really obsessed with TV-wise, I really had to go looking for other shows to care about, and I tried a bunch of things. Some of them worked out very well. Lost started, Battlestar Galactica ended up being something I really loved. Some, less so. I remember trying Prison Break at that time and some other things. But Buffy's special. Buffy is insanely funny, as well as being a good supernatural vampire show and all the rest of it. It turns tropes on its head. It does a bunch of things that are really smart, but it is really, really funny. And I think one of the things that sticks out is that sometimes I see people complain about Marvel style dialogue and they blame the Whedon stuff for that. And that always kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way, because I don't think that's really the problem. Because I think the dialogue in Avengers was perfectly funny, and the problem is that it's difficult for other people try to do the witty dialogue. In Buffy, Angel, and Firefly, the witty dialogue always worked for me. I always thought it was hilarious, and I realize that's a personal taste thing. Not everyone, there's some people who always hated the dialogue in these shows, and that's fair enough. Not for you by all means, but the wittiness, right? Some people hate that it's unrealistic or everyone's too witty. I love it in this show. I love, let's not jump to conclusions. I did not jump. I took a small step and their conclusions were. That's a great line of dialogue. I love how smart the dialogue is. I love these characters. I love, I grew attached to them. They feel like family, And I think that's the special thing about a long-running TV show, is that when you do have to say goodbye at the end of it, it feels like you're losing a family member almost. Or several family members in some way. Buffy it's got a lot of things in it that I love, right? Obviously, I love horror stuff. It's funny, though, that, most, teen stuff most vampire things aimed at teenagers are terrible, right? And I hate most of them. And it's so funny that, I was so into Buffy that there was this assumption that I would like other supernatural teen-focused stuff. and almost all of it just comes across as like, you know, generic young adult crap. Buffy is genuinely really smart in a lot of the things that it does, and it was kind of pushing the medium of TV forward in a lot of ways, because you'd have the Freak of the Week episodes, and there's a lot of those, especially early on, but you'd also have the season plot, the ongoing like serialized plot that would be running in the background, but would get some key episodes at the start, middle, and end of the season that would really advance them and make it feel like a big deal. And it really did give this sense of continuity, that even when we're dealing with a random, you know, bunny monster one episode, stuff that's still going on with the main season-long villain is still cooking in the background, and it sort of helps you place things, in hindsight especially, across what's happening. And I think it pushing those ideas forward, and even when it wasn't doing stuff, like I really hate an episode in season 2 that's called Bad Eggs. It's a really bad episode, but one of the things that I do like about it, and it's kind of one of the writing quirks that is really good, is that even when it's doing a standalone episode that doesn't really have anything to do with the season-long plot, thematically, it still ties into what's going on. The season 2 is a lot of talk about sex, and a lot of the repercussions of sex and things like that is a big thematic element in season 2. And that episode's about them looking after eggs as if they were a baby. It was that classic school trick thing, you know, that exercise they do. At least Americans do. I've never seen it done in a UK school, but like I've seen it on British or American TV before. But this idea that even this bad episode thematically still fits in with the overall idea of the season, even if it's not being overt about it, it's not shoving it in your face, but it is there. And there's lots of little things like that. Or like, you know, the standalone episodes will have a little moral that will somehow tie in to what the overall season is doing, right? That's something that would happen a lot and felt like a really strong element in the writing. And Buffy could get really dramatic. It could get really sad. You know, I think I won't talk about the events of the episode, but for those who know the show, The Body is a very special episode of TV that is so grounded and realistic in dealing with something that happens in everyday life that it really stuck out. And it was this thing where it felt so stark compared to a regular episode, because there was no monster to fight, there was no, you know, all these other things going on. But then it also does great standalone, like, creepy episodes. Everyone loves the musical episode, right? Even I kind of like the musical episode, and I hate musicals. So it's just a special show, I think, in its own right. It's a special show that belongs somewhere on a top list anyway. It absolutely does. But on a personal level, it's the first TV show I ever fell in love with. And I wouldn't be here today talking about TV shows as much as I do if I didn't fall in love with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So, number 1 is the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that is my top 50 TV shows of all time. As far as, you know, like, what I don't know what's missing here that people are going to be mad about. I mean, I feel like once upon a time people would have said, where's Game of Thrones? But then everyone who liked that show hated the last season or 2 anyway, so no one cares anymore. I've never seen The Sopranos, so that's probably one that'll come up. I know, I'll try it at some point and maybe do a series on it or whatever, I don't know. I have tried some other things like Mad Men, didn't really like it. I dropped that in season 2. Is there anything else obvious that feels like it's like missing that always comes up on these best of lists? I don't know if there is off the top of my head, but good chance I've either not seen it or maybe I didn't like it. Depends. By all means, put your best of lists in the comments. You know, give your top 10s. If you want to do a whole top 50, by all means do so. If there's stuff you're surprised I don't have, by all means ask about it, and I'll tell you if I've seen it or if I just don't like it, or, you know, whatever. You know, comment, all that stuff. So yeah, this was fun putting together. I would like to have more reasons to do some like top 10s, top 25s, and things like that on the channel. I'll have to think some other things. I think something that did occur to me as I was doing this is that maybe like a top 50 characters or something could be a fun thing to do. I don't know, but that also sounds like a really hard list to make, so I don't know if I'm up to that anytime soon. But we'll see what people think. But yeah, you can support the channel and all the content both here and over on the movie channel, Male Fuzz Movies, where you can find movie countdowns like this, where I do it with other people, and there's movie podcasts, 2 or 3 of those a week. Go check out that. But you can support both channels by going to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting over there for $5 or whatever a month and get some bonuses for your trouble. It's mostly movie-related bonuses, admittedly, because those shows kind of lend themselves to extras. It's a little bit tougher with the TV stuff. But if you like all the content and want to help keep it coming, that's the way to do it. You can also support via YouTube membership if that's more your thing, or give a super thanks on a video. Any support is appreciated. Every penny counts. Never feel bad that you're not doing enough or whatever. But thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you've enjoyed my rambles and some of my reasoning for this list. And I will see you sometime for something else. As far as TV reviews going on right now, I'm working through Person of Interest and the X-Files, which I guess is also not here, but I'm only on season 3 of the X-Files, so it's a bit early for me to be placing that. Those are kind of ongoing, kind of every other week for both of those right now. I'm going to try and get them to weekly again, but it's been kind of tough. I've got Patreon shows to do as well that people sort of pick on Patreon. Those are ongoing, like 80s Twilight Zone. And yeah, Severance Season 2 is done. There's some other things to try coming soon, but there's also Last of Us Season 2 about to hit, which I'll definitely be talking about. And that's one that didn't get onto the list. I didn't feel like Season 1 was enough to place it on there. Maybe it's something that'll change with Seasons 2 and 3. But yes. Anyway, that is me. My voice is gone. Like, my throat is struggling right now. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?